welcome to another Sogolytics training session. This one's Best Practices in Design. Very happy to have you here with me today. My name is Melissa. My title here is VP of Success, which means my job is to help you be successful. And what could be more important than setting up your next survey, CX, EX, assessment, whatever it is, your next project in the Sogolytics platform for success. Today, in probably under 20 minutes, we're going to cover some of those best practices, whether they take the form of do's or don'ts, that is to say, tips and pitfalls, or some strategies at a higher level to help improve your survey response rates, your results, and of course, making sure that you're getting the full benefit of the time and effort you're putting into your projects so that all of those results come to fruition in the end. Now, the big idea, as we have behind all of our sessions, probably why you're watching this today, design is critical. If there's the one bottom line upfront item that you remember beyond all else, take the time to design effectively. When you make bad decisions at the design stage, that means that later on you don't have useful results. It means you've wasted your time and your resources, possibly not just yours alone, but those of your team. And you've wasted some trust capital opportunities. That means the people you're reaching out to, they tried to give you some good effort, and unfortunately, if it didn't pan out or turned out to be a confusing or disruptive experience for them, they might not respond the next time you reach out, which of course leads to general frustration all around. So in order to accomplish this, we've gotten the please don't. Now, I've worked here for a good number of years, over a dozen years at this point, and we have seen some of the best looking survey projects and unfortunately some of the worst. And perception does make a big difference because when you're reaching out to someone, it might be a sort of a cold call, it might be a cold outreach or a warm outreach to someone who is a potential survey participant. So their perception of why you're reaching out, how you're reaching out, the way that you're reaching out, all of those pieces matter a lot. So let's start with when a survey looks like this, unfortunately, when it includes no intro or welcome. P.S. These are the bad things. No intro or welcome. Unclear purpose. Mandatory questions, forcing people to answer everything. Too many questions in the first place. I can just go down this entire list and show you there are a lot of things that can unfortunately create the wrong impression with your participants or would-be participants. Because if they see enough of these things, it means that they're less likely to respond. So, to put the context here, if a designer doesn't include an intro or welcome, it means that that person is probably in a hurry. They didn't have time to waste, so why should I? We start abruptly in the middle of the conversation. How old are you? What did you think of your last visit to our store? Well, warm things up. That's a best practice, of course, too, in any conversation. And we use the survey as conversation model here. So think a little bit about how you would start a conversation. It's probably a better way to start your survey as well. If the designer doesn't seem to have a sense of why they're doing something, maybe they don't know. Maybe they're just going through the motions. Creates the impression that they don't really care a lot about what's going on. They don't have a deep understanding, and therefore, perhaps they're just doing this because someone else told them to. Now, we always talk about purpose. We'll talk about it a little bit more as well, too. But the most unfortunate conversation I have with folks sometimes is when I say, so what's the goal of your survey project? And they say things like, I'm not really sure, or my boss just told me to do it. That's a bad sign. Too many mandatory questions. Think about this. If you were having that conversation with, a stranger or someone even slightly familiar that and they start to ask you questions upon questions upon questions and getting pushy and forceful about it, it's not a good feeling. And especially when there's so many questions. Maybe you want to say that person's bored. They don't have anything else to do with their time, when clearly you do. Or maybe they're just creative. They have a lot of interesting ideas. We think of young children who ask questions about everything. Why is this? What's this about? Curiosity is a very natural and healthy kind of thing to do. But of course, if it's not appropriate or relevant for the conversation, you want to be able to trim it out. Stuff that's too personal. Oh, by the way, how old are you? How much money do you make? How much do you weigh? Let's not get too personal too fast. We know that it can seem a little bit too invasive. We know side conversations about pre-population, using information that we already know about people, means that we don't have to ask a lot of those personal questions. But if something is too irrelevant that it's not going to be used in your results, why are you even asking it in the first place? So be really careful about this one. Again, irrelevant questions. We hear this all the time where people are saying, why are you even asking that? It has nothing to do with anything. Trim that stuff out, otherwise it comes across as rude. And again, you don't really know what you're doing. The incorrect question type. From a product perspective, we know things like, look, this is a single select radio button question. If you ask me to give more than one answer, you obviously don't understand how you've set this up yourself. And the reverse is also true. If you're giving checkbox questions and you're asking people to just choose one, well, maybe you've made a mistake here that's going to reflect in your results, but also it shows that you don't really know, you haven't done any testing, you're not really paying attention to your project. If the order of the question seems confusing, perhaps it's because the person putting them together is confused. Have you ever had a conversation with someone who starts with the wrong question? They don't lead up to anything. Perhaps they're starting in the middle and you're the one who needs to catch up. It can be a little disorienting. Same thing with having the answers in the wrong order. For example, all of them are in alphabetical order except one or two. Or there's no apparent reason for the order in which the answers are listed. It's just the order in which I thought of them. It shows a lack of intentionality. Missing answer options. If you ask me to say, what city I live in, and you don't have my city listed, means that you weren't paying close attention, or perhaps I'm not the intended audience for your survey. Either way, I'm less likely to respond. Didn't pay attention, didn't do any testing. Maybe you gave me a big text box, but you only gave me a few characters, or vice versa. We just talked about this recently in another session as well too. The worst. You're not paying attention and you're not testing. Maybe you didn't give any directions. We sort of all make fun of the kind of standardized tests that have extensive introductions that say, this section is about to ask you questions about this topic. Here's how you need to answer, fill in the bubble, or correctly mark your answer. Yeah, it's a lot of information, but that standardization means that what's being tested is actually the questions, it's actually the knowledge there. It's not the process. People should never be confused about the process. And if there's the potential that they might be, you need to give them directions up front. Here's what this is about. Here's what this section is about. Here's how this information will be used. Ambiguous language. Now, we have all also been in conversations where we hear people use jargon, acronyms, cool stuff, both of these together. And these two things go together. Maybe you don't really know what you're talking about with this ambiguous language, in which case you're not going to understand my answer. Right? Ambiguous language is an example like, do you think this was clear? Clear is a relative term, right? Or was this experience positive for you? Well, maybe there are some parts that were good experience parts, some parts that weren't good. So giving clarity means that you're very clear on what the question's asking, and you'll be able to interpret the results clearly as well too. When you start to use those terms of jargon that are only understood by a few people, you give this impression that either you're so pleased with yourself and you're the only one who knows these terms and everyone else should just catch up, or maybe you're just being unclear. Either way, you're making assumptions, and it's really, really important not to make assumptions. Because if I say to you, what do you think about XYZ? And XYZ means one thing to me and something else to you, our results aren't going to measure up. It's not going to make sense in the interpretation. Bad images, wrong size, weird cropping, strange stuff like this. It means that you didn't take the time to clean things up. Unfortunately, ugly design, appearance does matter. We'll come back to it. It means that you didn't care about it too much. For me, this means that maybe you used our default templates, which are very nice as well too, or you didn't change the subject line of your email invitation. For us in the Sogolytics platform, we know that your voice counts is the default subject line. No problem with that at all. That's a great subject line. as a placeholder. But if I come in and get a survey from you and you sent me an invitation that says your voice counts, then I see that you've used all of the default settings in visual settings, for example, it means that you didn't put too much effort into it. If you're testing, that's fine, but if you're trying to engage with me as a participant, it's not enough. And typos. You're just lazy. It's a tool that has spell check. You should probably use it. So, pretty straightforward list of things that we don't want to do because we're creating that impression that as a designer, I don't know, I just need you, the participant, to do the work. And that's not fair. And first of all, it's not fair. And second of all, it's not going to be effective. You're not just putting it out there just to put it out there, going through the motions. Probably you're putting it out there because you need results. So never fear. Do the opposite of all of those things. But the second piece here to talk about are the things that we want you to do to be strategic. So there are 5 of them that we've identified that we know make a huge difference in talking through the design here. And the first one is reporting. Now, we always use the phrase design with the end in mind. And these are the key questions for you to answer and for your team to answer as well too. When you start any survey project, who wants the data? What is this all about? We'll come to purpose, but who wants the data? What is it going to look like? What do they have to know? If it's you probably have a good sense of, but it's really, really helpful to stop and think. I need to know, for example, satisfaction level, and I need to know location, and I need to know tenure. Maybe you're doing an employee survey because you want to know how's it going for people across different locations and across different tenure tracks. So how long they've been with the organization. How do the results need to be displayed? Like I said, maybe you're going to segment by those groups. How will the data be used? If you need to have different reports for each location better be part of the survey. And if you, for example, already know the locations where your employees work, which is probably a pretty sure thing, you're probably using pre-population. That is data population that you pre-fill before you're sending out the survey. So you don't have to ask me as an employee, by the way, Melissa, what location do you work in? It's insulting to me and it creates distance between us instead of building that close, engaged connection. So design with report in mind. If you can get someone to present to you, it should be like this, or at least just talk it through. It's really, really helpful. This is especially useful if you're doing a repeat project and people start to say, you know what, actually it would be helpful to have trend information. What did this group say last year? What did this group say this year? All of that kind of information needs to be built in, especially if you're pre-filling data. Maybe you're pulling it from a directory. That's a really cool, relatively newer feature that you might not have used too much yet, but start to think about what do we already know and what do we need to ask people directly. Reducing the number of questions that we're asking people, of course, saves them time and keeps them sweet a little bit longer rather than getting that survey fatigue too early in the process. This is the worst feeling when you are working through a questionnaire or even in a conversation, you can't really figure out what it's all about. We have this face or this feeling is like, hello, what is the point of any of this? So before you get started, make sure that you have a clear purpose. If you cannot figure out the purpose yourself, go back to square one, find out who is the person who needs this data. Why are you even doing this in the first place if there's nobody who needs the data? Because from there, if you can't define it for yourself, it's going to be really, really difficult to define it for your participants. Now, whether you come out and say every single detail of your purpose in the survey or even in the invitation, that's up to you. It's your discretion. But if I'm your employee, to continue that same example, I want to know, what is this regarding? It's the same way when somebody leaves you a voicemail or sends you a text. They want to say, hey, can we talk? You immediately think, what's this about? What's the point? How can I help you? What do you need from me? Right? Think that through instead of saying to someone, hey, take this. You know, maybe there's a carrot or a stick approach, like, hey, we need this data before Friday or else. But there's also an incentive approach. But first of all, let people know what it's for so that they are more likely to be motivated if it's actually relevant for them. And if it's not relevant for them, why are you asking them? Think about that idea of relevance consistently because it requires you having a clear purpose to be able to identify what belongs and what doesn't belong. what's part of this topic and what's a nice to have. Those nice to have things are not necessarily required. Obviously, they're in the nice to have category here. They can give you a little bit of information extra, perhaps, that isn't absolutely required. But be really cautious about asking too many of these questions. Like I said, curiosity is a very positive trait. Again, we think of little kids being like, but why? But tell me more. But what's that about? But how does that work? Don't get into this trap of trying to find out every single thing about people. Just keep it focused, and they'll be more likely to engage with you next time. Also, put things in an order that makes sense. That has to do with the relevance as well. So you're building that case of why this is important. And if anything stands out, like, hey, how did that question get in there? You know, I'm not giving you a job interview and then I suddenly ask you an irrelevant question in the middle. Of course, in a job interview, like, is this a trick? What are we doing? We're very tempted to answer those questions. But in a survey, people are less likely to answer irrelevant questions and they're more likely to feel turned off and stop participating. Remember that your audience is the most important group of people here. You can design the most beautiful survey in the world, but if you don't know anything about the folks that you're trying to reach out to, well, yeah, you're less likely to actually reach out to them successfully. They're sitting there quietly in the audience who knows a world of black and white. You need to be able to color in that picture. You need to be able to figure out who are those people? What do they know about this topic? What should you already know about them? Again, maybe it was your employees, but maybe it's your customers. Why are you reaching out to them? If it's your customers, you probably already know what kind of relationship do they have with you? Do they have an account with you? For us, for example, at Sogo, what kind of package do you have? How long have you been with us as a client? Who's your account manager? All of this kind of information can be really, really helpful in helping us build that picture. If you're in marketing, you know a lot about building a persona, or in product design, you think a lot about your target user, right? The end user who is the one that drives all of our decisions. So we can think about how would this person feel about it? Or how would this persona react to this use case, this strategy, this feature? That's what we want to think about in designing with the audience in mind too. The same thing when you have a conversational partner. When I reach out to them, when I ask them a question, why should they care about anything that I have to say? And finally, there's a little bit philosophical stuff there too, but what's the best way to reach them? Here we start to think a little bit about distribution. And of course, this is talking about design, but we know that this is really, really critical as well too. If you can't reach out to them by email, by phone, by SMS, what is it the best way to reach out to them and when? What's happening in their lives beyond this moment? Engagement, we love this. We want people to be super jazzed all the time. These are things that we've said already. Keep it short. Make sure you have a good flow, variety of question types, not just to be fancy, but to keep people paying attention. Notice this is the only picture that you've seen moving, right? It's really like, let's go. Relevant media, all of the right answer options, pre-fill known information, use logic. There's lots of cool advanced features we can talk about in a separate session as well too. But your goal isn't just to be like, hey, are you still there? Hey, your goal is to keep people interested as well. So make sure that that's part of your priority, whether it's through the technology, the questions you're asking, or your flow. And yes, we just had a great session on this not too long ago. Visual settings help you with recognition. Make sure that your invitations and surveys match up. All of the style. Don't get too carried away. Follow a style guide if you have one, and make sure you test. Yes, looks really do matter. We've made a few comments about that here. Functionality, content, audience purpose, all of those things are important, but the icing on the cake really does make a difference. There are so many strategies that we could talk about here. We know that building your own toolbox, pick and choose these strategies that work best for you, but do things like testing with your own team and with external teams. So a small group of participants, a pilot is a really great way to start, especially if it's a long project or a big project. Seek feedback, super meta, about your feedback request. Hey, how was that survey for you? What did you like about it? Was it too long? Was it too short? Get that small focus group together as well. Especially if this is something you're doing over and over again, revisit it, review it periodically with changing priorities that you have, maybe even some fresh tech options that you could use too down the road. Are there other strategies? Yes. Join this live session. Of course, this one's a recording, but if you join this live session, we'd love to hear from you as well too about the things that work best for you in your design best practices. I will say then for now, basically right on time. Thanks for joining. We have so many other sessions to cover, but I hope this has been helpful for you as a series of reminders of things to keep in mind when you are building your next survey project. Better design, more success. We'll see you next time. Be well.